On today's show, trying to draw some positives from the Houston Rockets' blowout loss on the second night of a back-to-back against the Cleveland Cavaliers, Jabari Smith Jr.'s offense, Alperen Sengun's defense, plus Tari Eason's continued production off the Houston Rockets bench, plus the big news of the day, the Houston Rockets reportedly interested in possibly acquiring Atlanta Hawks big man John Collins. Would that be a good move for this Rockets team? What would the trade even look like? How would that impact the offseason decisions for this Houston Rockets team moving forward? We're going to break down all of that for you coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin. The show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Where for today's show, I want you to comment. How would you feel about the Rockets acquiring John Collins? What would you think? What would a trade have to look like for you to feel good about picking up John Collins? Or do you want no part in trading for John Collins? Let me know in the YouTube comments. Read each and every one of those every single day. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Rockets part of your day, whether it's on the way to work, whether it's on your lunch break, whether it's at the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day every single day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, where we're going to get started is the Cavaliers game. Before diving into the rumors, the speculation about John Collins and what that impact would look like for this Houston Rockets team, let's talk a little bit about the Rockets-Cavs game, because it was, let's be completely honest here, it sucked. It was pretty ugly, and it got really ugly at the end of the first quarter. The Rockets actually came out of the gate, and they were competitive. They looked good. Like, the Rockets actually looked good in the first quarter, but unfortunately, they were still missing Kevin Porter Jr., no Eric Gordon, no Jae'Sean Tate. They had very little bench depth to actually go to. And because of that, they wound up starting Josh Christopher, who gets his first start of the season, third career start overall, alongside Jalen Green, Al P, KJ Martin, and Jabari Smith Jr. So near the end of the first quarter, when Steven Silas had to go to his bench, things got really rough. And here's my issue, and I feel like a broken record saying this, but when you know you've only got two, good offense generating players or guys that can consistently generate good offense in Jalen and LP, why would you not attempt to stagger them more? Because the minutes at the end of the first quarter where the Rockets had neither one of those guys on the court, the Rockets completely floundered offensively. And then the Cavaliers got on a roll on their offensive side, and they went on a huge run to close out the quarter, taking a 12-point advantage into the second quarter. And credit to Steven Silas, he started with Alp at the top of the second quarter, but by then you're fighting from behind. And so I take exception to some of the substitution patterns there. I feel like you got to have at least one of Jalen or Alp on the floor at all times. If you have no Kevin, if you have no Eric Gordon, be a little bit better with the substitutions. But I want to focus on some positives here. And the positives that I do have before this game completely unraveled and before things took a turn for the worse, Jabari Smith Jr. looked good offensively. He looked a lot more fluid. He looked a lot more comfortable. He didn't look nearly as rusty as he did in his first game back. And he was getting the shots that I feel like he needs to get, right? He was getting into the mid-range. He was attacking the basket. He was operating within the flow and not necessarily forcing as much, especially early in the game. And I thought that was a great sign from him offensively, and is more what we can expect moving forward. Again, last game, he was rusty, missed a couple games, all that, maybe still not 100% with the ankle. So you got to take last game with a grain of salt. I know Jabari's had a lot of up and down offensive performances, but this one was encouraging. And I thought he looked a lot more fluid and a lot more comfortable out there offensively in this game. Alperen Sengun, He put up numbers offensively, of course, as he usually does. 14 points, 7 boards, 7 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. But I want to focus on the defensive side, the steals and the blocks and the deflections, and just overall his defense in this game I thought really stood out, especially in that first and second quarter before this game really completely got out of hand and the Rockets were down by as many as 30 plus at one point in this game. Alp's defense was solid, and he was playing passing lanes. His pick and roll coverages were good. He was deflecting passes. Like, he was doing all the little stuff that you really want to see out of your big man, including recovering and blocking shots at the rim, right? So he was not necessarily being a rim deterrent, but just making stuff happen. So those are the kinds of things, that's the kind of engagement and the activity that you need to see out of Alperen Sengun on the defensive side. And it probably made it a little bit easier because he was checking Jarrett Allen. And so that, Jarrett Allen is not a threat to shoot the ball from distance. He's not even a threat to shoot the ball from the mid-range. Now, there was a couple moments that Jarrett Allen got the better of him, unfortunately, down low. But by and large, Alp kind of held his own and was a much better, interior presence defensively than I feel like we've seen for a majority of this season in this game. So that was encouraging, as well as the fact that neither Jarrett Allen nor Evan Mobley could guard Alp on the offensive end. The number of times that Alp was spinning and got him in the spin cycle and, pump fake, pivot, twist, spin, up and under. He had the little ice cream scoop shot at one point. He got Evan Mobley twirling like a ballerina at points in this game. It was an encouraging game from Alp on both ends of the court, actually. And then a couple more points here. Josh Christopher, who did get the start in place of Eric Gordon, I thought he was good in transition. I thought especially early the Rockets kind of leaned into that, and then they got away from it, right? They were getting stops. They were getting out in transition. They were trying to make things happen, and then they moved away from it, unfortunately, which is something this Rockets team routinely does, is they'll find something that's working, and then they stop doing it, unfortunately. So I liked what we saw out of Josh in his start. And then off the Rockets bench, Tari Eason just continues to be a menace and make things happen. There's no other way to describe his game, right? 18 points, 8 of 13 shooting. Did miss all 3 of his threes in this one, which is not usually the case. He's been a pretty solid three-point shooter, but 11 rebounds, 5 of them on the offensive glass. Tari just so unexpectedly goes in and crashes the offensive glass like his life depends on it, gets those boards, and then gets either extra chance opportunities for the Rockets or puts the ball back up and scores little putback opportunities. Tari does not mess around when it comes to the glass. So yet another double-double for Tari Eason, and 3 assists and a block to add on top of it. So his production off the Rocket, whether he's a starter, whether he's off the Rockets bench, he produces in a big way for this Rockets team. He just makes things happen. That's the only way that I can describe it. Last point that I want to drop in here about this game before we move on to the reported Rockets interest in John Collins from the Atlanta Hawks. We saw at one point in this game Boban Marjanovic and Alperen Sengun sharing the floor together. And I guess to counter the size of Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. But why? You're not going to counter that. Boban is not the way you counter that. I feel like it just, I don't know. I won't even dig into that. It's too much. But what I do want to highlight is the fact that we saw Boban and Alp share minutes on the court together this season before we saw Alp and Garuba share minutes on the court together this season, even though that combination of bigs might actually make more sense because Garuba is theoretically more suited to play the 4 than he is the 5 at the NBA level. He's a bit of an undersized 5 in the NBA. And on top of that, Steven Silas even hinted a month and a half ago that we might see some Alp Garuba minutes at the 4 and the 5, respectively, this season, and we still haven't seen it. Those two guys have shared the floor for a total sum of 0 minutes this season. So we have now seen Alp and Boban together before we saw Alp and Garuba. And for some reason, also, Garuba's in the doghouse now. Garuba wasn't even playing garbage time minutes in this game for whatever reason, and was working out on an exercise bike back in the Rockets tunnel instead of actually being on the court. I don't know what has happened to put to have Garuba be in the doghouse for Steven Silas, but that's concerning because I think Garuba's got a lot of potential and has looked really good and has given the Rockets a lot of energy as part of the Goon Squad and all that throughout points this season. So I don't know what he's suddenly done to not be in good standing with Steven Silas, but that is a concerning trend moving forward. I want to see Garuba getting some run on a consistent basis. I think that his production usually warrants it. But yeah, that's what I got from this Rockets-Cavs game. Some positives, some negatives, and that's about it. I mean, they just did not have the bench to keep up with this Cavs team. Once the Rockets went to their bench, it was all she wrote. But with that, coming up, let's talk about trades. John Collins, a Houston Rocket, possibly? We'll talk about that, the impact, what a trade would even look like for John Collins. We're going to get there, but first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are here, and we are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they are the #1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better because they have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers join today to get started with $150 in free bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlays. Right now, you can head over to FanDuel to take a look at who the odds-on favorites are for the NBA title this season. The Boston Celtics leading the way at +390, Milwaukee Bucks at +550. You got the Brooklyn Nets and Denver Nuggets both tied up at +800 apiece. And then rounding out the top 6, you got the Golden State Warriors at +850 and the Memphis Grizzlies right on the outside at +1,000. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, basketball fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, let's talk a little, get the hands rolling here. Let's talk a little trade rumors, reported interest, in all that jazz, all the speculation, the fun stuff, right? We'll fire up the trade machine, all that good stuff. The Rockets maybe showing some interest in the Atlanta Hawks big man John Collins. Now, let's walk through what the Athletics' Kelly Iko had to share about the John Collins situation before kind of unpacking it here on the show. So first off, Kelly Iko reports, the Atlanta Hawks have been shopping forward John Collins for a while, per Arsham Sharania, and have been gauging interest around the league and potential packages for the 25-year-old, conversations that have included the Houston Rockets, league sources told The Athletic, which was later confirmed by team sources. The sources were granted anonymity to speak freely on the matter. There's been nothing concrete from the Rockets, merely ideas floated by the Hawks to Houston, among other teams, but the interest is real. Now, Kelly Iko does share 3 years ago, prior to Houston trading Clint Capella in what turned out to be a blockbuster deal involving 4 teams, The Athletic reported of the Rockets' request for Collins, at the time he was 23 years old, in exchange for Capella's services. So the Rockets did try to acquire John Collins before. Now, there are some things to take into consideration when you look at the idea of the Houston Rockets acquiring John Collins, right? Let's unpack this before we fire up the trade machine. So first things first, Collins would be an immediate upgrade and quite possibly one of, if not the best player on this Rockets team, like overnight. He'd add some length, some size, shooting, solid defender, like all that. He would be an upgrade almost across the board over anybody on this current Rockets team because of just what he brings to the table. And he's an experienced player, right? So that's the terminology we decided we would use here at Locked On Rockets. He's not a veteran, but he's an experienced player, right? Kind of in that same mold of like a Jae'Sean Tate, right? Jae'Sean Tate, wow. Well, that's Jae'Sean Tate's permanent forever nickname now, Jae'Sean Tate. Anyways, John Collins would add some experience. He would add a seasoned voice to the Rockets locker room, and he would be a huge talent upgrade. Now, first question is, the biggest question is what would it cost? We're going to dive into what the cost to acquire John Collins would look like here in a little bit. But where would you play John Collins, right? Would you play him at the 3-4 next to Alperen Sengun and Jabari Smith Jr. and just, Collins and Jabari can interchangeably play both of those positions pretty adequately, I would say. Maybe you make John Collins the 4 because he's a bit bigger, more into his NBA body, a bit stronger than Jabari at this point. Maybe that's a possibility. So, I mean, I'd be interested in seeing what that lineup would actually look like and what damage that lineup could do overall. And then it would add just the Rockets desperately need shooting, right? They have no consistent outside shooters. And that is a big part of why the Rockets offense looks so bad at times, is because they generate some good looks. They, whether it's Kevin or Jalen getting downhill and kicking the ball out, or Alp, creating opportunities for his teammates, they generate some really high quality looks, but unfortunately they just don't have the shooters to actually knock down those shots. So John Collins would absolutely give them another kind of a piece to the puzzle, if you will, of a player who can actually hit some of those shots, right? Now, the issue is his contract, right? He gives you all this massive production, right? But his contract is not the best. I mean, you're paying just over $20 million a year. Basically, we'll just average it out to $25 million a year. You've got him you'd be on the hook for John Collins for at least the next 4 years, $100 million guaranteed, just over $100 million guaranteed. He does have a player option at the very end of his deal. The final year is a $26 million player option. And keeping in mind, 26 million is not an albatross in the grand scheme of things when you look at the landscape of NBA contracts right now, and especially with the NBA salary cap continuing to rise. Like, 26 is actually probably a pretty fair value. It might even be below what John Collins' actual market value would be right now for a player of his caliber, right? Somebody who can give you the production that he does. But at the same time, that is a significant amount of money to be committing, especially when right now this team doesn't have a direction, right? This team doesn't know, is John Collins the missing piece for us to like suddenly be over the top, right? He fits timeline-wise. He's 25 years old. You're not trading for an over the hill veteran to suddenly try and be good overnight. It's not that type of move, thankfully. But is he the answer, right? Does he make sense as a long-term fixture of this organization? Or is it simply, okay, you're going to try and trade for John Collins and then maybe you flip John Collins further down the line? I don't like that idea because, frankly, it feels like we said earlier, it feels like the Hawks have been trying to trade John Collins for like years now. It feels like every trade deadline, every offseason we hear, the Hawks have got to figure something out with John Collins. Even John Collins' name was mentioned in the DeJounte Murray trade talks, right? When they were chatting up the Spurs about trading for Murray. So acquiring John Collins would have a lot of benefits for this Houston Rockets team, but at the same time, there are some drawbacks, right? Because it's the contract situation, right? It's the committal, or it's committing to that long, at least 4 years, likely 4 years, at least 3, possibly 4 years of John Collins. And then on top of that, the salary eating into your salary cap, because right now the Houston Rockets project to have about $60 million in cap space this offseason. And that includes the idea of them declining the option for Eric Gordon's contract and like walking into free agency with all that money. You don't have that option if you trade what is Eric Gordon making about $20 million. If you take back John Collins, who's making about $25 million, then suddenly that $25 million is going to eat into your cap space. And then you only have 35 to play with instead of 60. So does that make sense, right? Does that make sense for the Houston Rockets to acquire, yes, a talented player in John Collins, but a guy who would eat into your cap space this offseason and kind of reduce your flexibility, your optionality, your options this offseason, whether it's going after a big name guy like James Harden, a marquee free agent signing, or whether it's trying to cobble together, some really quality free agent, veteran signings, like maybe you grab a Fred VanVleet and a Miles Turner to kind of shore up the 5 spot and the point guard spot. I don't know. There's options out there, right? There's a lot of different directions that this Rockets team can go, but suddenly you reduce and you minimize all those options if you commit yourself to the money that John Collins is currently making. Now, again, from the on-court perspective, I think there's a lot of intriguing reasons to do it. I think there's a lot that he would bring to the table, but then you factor in all the other stuff, right? The timeline for the Rockets, the future, all of that. And there are some very valid concerns. Now, here's the big question is, what would it even look like? What would a John Collins trade look like for this Houston Rockets team? We're going to fire up the trade machine and we'll kind of churn out some possibilities as to what a trade would look like coming up here in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. So we kind of laid some of the framework for, the reasons both for and possibly against a John Collins trade for this Houston Rockets team. I do want your thoughts on the John Collins situation. Let me know in the YouTube comments. But let's fire up the big question, right? What would the cost associated with John Collins actually be like? What would a trade actually be like? So Kelly Eco did suggest a trade in his article, and we will share that here. Let me lay the framework first, though. So Kelly Eco suggested kind of taking a few things into account, the Suns' desire to move Jay Crowder, Houston's with Gordon, and the Hawks with Collins. There's a 3-team framework that could potentially work for all parties. So let's go ahead and fire that up and see what that 3-team framework would actually look like. And here is the trade that Kelly Eco suggested. So let's walk through it. John Collins comes to Houston, as well as a 2026 first-round pick from the Phoenix Suns that is lottery protected. So a lottery-protected first-round draft pick. Now, going out from Houston would be Eric Gordon and KJ Martin land in Phoenix, and then the Rockets send a 2025 first-round draft pick, also lottery protected, as well as the 2027 pick from the Brooklyn Nets to the Atlanta Hawks. And then the Hawks also receive Jay Crowder, Dario Saric, and Landry Shamet. Now let's unpack this a little bit. So first off, I don't mind, I guess, sending a first rounder that's lottery protected, because you assume the Rockets, even if they're on the upswing, will probably still be in that lottery area. 2025 is a bit risky, though, because next season, as ideally the season they're back in the play-in, and then a season more on top of that, they might actually be their pick might land somewhere in that 15 to 20 range as they're trying to climb their way up the Western Conference standings in the most optimistic of scenarios, as this team is hopefully getting better further down the line. So I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the Rockets trading any of their own draft assets to try and acquire John Collins. On top of that, the Phoenix Suns 2026 first round pick, lottery protected. Again, it's tough to tell. It's tough to say where the Suns are going to be organizationally in a few years. But lottery protected firsts being floated back and forth, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of it. And when we're looking at what the Rockets are getting back from basically shipping out Eric Gordon and KJ Martin, right? Let's break down the value of what we think Eric Gordon and KJ Martin are worth. The Rockets are trying to hold steady and get a first-round draft pick for Eric Gordon. At this point, I don't even think it's going to happen. If you can get a good second-rounder on the table for Eric Gordon at this point, you might have to just jump at it, and keep in mind also no bad money coming back is the other key part when it comes to Eric Gordon. The Rockets have missed their window to trade Eric Gordon. There's no other way to slice it. They held on for Eric Gordon far too long, and now they are backed into a corner trying to get a first-round draft pick for him, and it's probably not going to work. So let's just say Eric Gordon, best you could do for him is a high second. All right. Then KJ Martin, ideally you can get at least a first-round draft pick for KJ Martin. At a bare minimum, a first-round draft pick for KJ Martin. And that's what the Rockets are effectively getting here in this trade. They're getting a 2026 first-round draft pick, lottery protected. We'll say that piece is for KJ Martin from the Phoenix Suns. So the Rockets are effectively giving up 2 first-round draft picks for John Collins. One, I don't necessarily want to give up that Brooklyn Nets pick, especially as far out as that one is. The 2027 pick is potentially going to be very, very juicy depending on what happens with the Nets over these next couple of years. So that one would be definitely not one of the ones that I would want to trade. I would, definitely try to adjust that and get the 2024 pick on the table from Brooklyn. And even then, that pick has a chance to be really good because Brooklyn always feels like they're one media session away from imploding, right? They always feel like they're one day away from just everything, being a powder keg and just igniting, and suddenly nobody wants to play there anymore. Everybody's mad at each other. Kyrie's in the news again, like all that, right? So I'm still kind of in favor of holding on to those Brooklyn Nets picks and kind of waiting and seeing and biding your time with them rather than cashing them all in on a guy who is... John Collins is not the guy, right? John Collins is a complementary piece, and the Rockets still don't have the guy. They've got a lot of guys that look like complementary pieces. They don't have the guy, right? if you could guarantee me that the Rockets were getting Scoot Henderson this offseason, then maybe I'd be a little bit more amenable to trading for John Collins right now, using potentially some of the future Nets assets. But again, we don't know what's going to happen quite just yet. It's too early to tell. I think this is a slight overpay for the Rockets for John Collins, honestly, because when you look at it, they're basically paying 2 firsts and arguably maybe 3 firsts, right? Depending on what value you think you should be getting back for Eric Gordon. KJ Martin by himself would absolutely be worth a first-round draft pick from probably a bunch of different teams would offer a first-round draft pick. And you might even be able to get a first-round draft pick that is only like, say, top 10 protected, not even just lottery protected. So you're basically paying those 3 picks, the 2 that are actually in the trade, and then also KJ Martin, which you're getting the pick back from the Suns. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of this framework. I understand where it comes from, right? Jay Crowder wants out of Phoenix. John Collins wants out of Atlanta. Eric Gordon wants out of Houston. Like, all 3 of those guys are disgruntled, so let's just do a little Yahtzee shuffle and get them all, in different spots so they can be happy again. But packaging KJ alongside Eric to maybe try and get more value back for Eric Gordon just feels like at that point that you're trying to salvage a situation rather than, like, even if you look at KJ Martin's production, I feel like KJ Martin is almost maybe like a poor man's John Collins at this point. He doesn't have the size or the length that John Collins does, but he plays above the rim. He plays well without the basketball. His 3-point shot has been really, really solid. And the Rockets haven't even given him really that much of a chance to actually shine. So moving on from KJ Martin, who is on an incredibly team-friendly deal, to acquire John Collins, whose production isn't that much better than KJ's when KJ gets the actual opportunity to produce in a starting role, at $25 million a year, I just don't know if it's necessarily worth it, right? Like, I'm really torn on the idea of whether bringing John Collins into the fold would actually make a lot of sense. At least not in this trade permutation. Now, I drafted one up myself. I kept it a little bit more simple. I went with just a 1-to-1 team trade, just the Hawks and Rockets, and I kept it super simple. And this is me lowballing Atlanta like crazy, right? Because, again, it feels like Atlanta's been trying to move on from John Collins forever now, right? So I did John Collins to the Rockets for Eric Gordon, KJ Martin, and the 2023 Milwaukee first rounder. That's like nothing, right? I'm sure that there's probably a better offer out there for John Collins than this, but what this allows Atlanta to do is, it gives Atlanta another, it gives them Eric Gordon, veteran presence, can contribute to winning right now, all that stuff. And then they can move on from Eric in the offseason. They say, all right, bye, Eric. We don't want you anymore. So he's effectively an expiring contract. They get KJ Martin, who, again, for all the reasons that I just laid out, is kind of like a poor man's John Collins anyways. He just slots a bit more naturally into the 3 spot, and John Collins slots a bit more naturally into the 4 spot on a team. A bit more size, a bit more length, all that. And then they also get a first-round draft pick on top of it. So that, and they get off of John Collins' long contract. So that is like my super duper lowball offer for the Atlanta Hawks. There are definitely probably some offers, some trade permutations in the middle ground between those two, where the Rockets maybe don't give up quite as much as the first trade, but they're giving up a bit more than that second trade. Maybe you could swap out the Milwaukee pick for, I don't know, next year's Brooklyn pick or something to that effect. I'd be very hesitant, though, given the state of the Rockets franchise, to go all in and to trade any of the Rockets' future draft assets, right? Because they already owe 3 of their future picks still to OKC, right? Those haven't started conveying yet. And moving on from even more of your future draft capital in that regard could be really dangerous, because this team doesn't have a clear sign of like, oh yeah, they're trending in the right direction yet, right? If they were trending up, if they were trending positively, if this were the type of move that was going to move the needle and push them over the top and make them contenders or something, I'd say, yep, jump at it, all for it, right? But that's not where this organization is at right now. So obviously, this is just reported interest. This is rumors. This is the Hawks just kind of probing, picking up the phone, saying, hey, Rafael Stone, you may be interested in John Collins, ? So maybe it's nothing. Maybe it doesn't amount to anything. But at the same time, for all the reasons that we laid out, right, I would probably be against it at this point just because I want to see what the Rockets can do this offseason, right? With all the cap flexibility, with all the money, opening up, with, potentially, either signing a marquee free agent or bringing in a couple veteran pieces to help push these young guys along. That, I think, is the best move, because then even if you whiff on the open market, you have a chance to sign other guys, right? If you're committing that $25 million to John Collins, you're locked into that. And then suddenly you have less money to potentially throw around in this offseason when those free agents are actually available. So those are my thoughts on the John Collins situation. Share your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the YouTube comments. I read each and every one of those every single day. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.